My father once told me that reputation is everything. He said it to me when I was 12 years old, sitting in his office at Stewart Memorial Hospital, watching him work through case files and medical documents. He said it with such certainty, such conviction, that I believed him completely. I believed that reputation was the currency that mattered most in this world. I believed that a good reputation was worth more than money, worth more than health, worth more than truth itself. It took me 35 years to understand that he was right about one thing. Reputation is everything, but not for the reasons he thought. Reputation is everything because it reveals exactly what kind of person you are willing to become in order to protect it. My name is Erin Stewart. I am a videographer and documentary filmmaker. I am the son of Dr. Joshua Robinson, one of the most respected physicians in the Pacific Northwest. I am the stepson of Elizabeth Spencer, the woman my father married after my biological mother passed away. I am the half-brother of Ann Owens, a sociologist who specializes in institutional culture and the dynamics of organizational silence. And I am the person who destroyed my father's career by telling the truth. The story of how I became the person who destroyed my father's career begins 3 months before what would become known as the Gala, the event that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of all of our lives. 3 months before that night, I completed my graduate thesis at the University of Washington. My thesis was a documentary film titled Inside the White Coat Medical Ethics and Institutional Culture in America. The film was my attempt to explore the way that hospitals function as institutions. I was interested in how ethical guidelines were implemented, how they were sometimes compromised, and how the pressures of institutional reputation could override individual moral responsibility. I conducted interviews with doctors, nurses, administrators, and patients. I observed surgeries. I reviewed medical records. I examined the way that decisions about transparency and disclosure were made at every level of the hospital hierarchy. My father's hospital, Stewart Memorial, became the central focus of my film because I had access there. Because I was Joshua Robinson's son, people were willing to talk to me in ways they might not have talked to an outside filmmaker. Because I was trusted, people revealed things that they might not have revealed to a stranger. What I discovered was both familiar and shocking. There were 3 deaths at Stewart Memorial Hospital over a period of 18 months. All 3 deaths were connected to surgical complications. In each case, the complications were the result of decision-making that prioritized efficiency over safety. In each case, the attending surgeons had documented concerns in their preliminary reports. In each case, those concerns were removed from the official medical records before the cases were closed. The families of the deceased never knew that the deaths could have been prevented. The families never knew that their loved ones' lives had been sacrificed on the altar of institutional efficiency. The families never knew because the hospital had decided that acknowledging these facts would damage the reputation of Stewart Memorial Hospital. I interviewed one of the mothers whose daughter had died unnecessarily. I showed her the documentation. I showed her the preliminary reports from the attending surgeon. I showed her the evidence that her daughter's death was preventable. And I watched as a woman who thought she had come to terms with her grief realized that she had been lied to. I watched as her face changed from sadness to rage. That interview is the centerpiece of my documentary. It is 14 minutes long. And in those 14 minutes, the woman describes the moment when she understood that her daughter died, not because of medical complexity or bad luck, but because a hospital had decided that reputation was more important than honesty. When I completed the film, I was proud of it. I thought it was important work. I thought it was the kind of film that could change the way people think about institutional accountability and medical ethics. I thought it was a film that my father would be proud of. I was wrong on all counts. I submitted the film to several film festivals. It was accepted to 3 of them. It won awards at 2. The film began to circulate in academic and activist circles. And then, through a series of social media posts and word-of-mouth promotion, it reached a wider audience. One particular clip from the film went viral. It was a moment captured during an interview with my father. I had been filming him in his office for what I thought was background material. I was filming him discussing medical ethics and hospital administration. And then I asked him a question about the difficult decisions that administrators sometimes have to make when individual cases threaten institutional reputation. And he answered honestly. He said something that I knew was truthful because I had heard him say similar things before in different contexts. He said, "Sometimes patients die. That's the reality of medicine. But when a patient dies, and it reflects poorly on the institution, you have to understand that the institution's reputation is also important, because without a strong reputation, the institution can't attract the best surgeons, the best staff, the best patients. So sometimes you have to make the decision that protects the institution, even if it means disappointing the family." That quote, taken out of context, made my father sound like a monster. That quote, repeated across social media and news websites, made it seem like he was saying that hospital reputation was more important than patients' lives. Of course, that wasn't exactly what he was saying. He was trying to articulate the complex ethical calculations that hospital administrators have to make. He was trying to describe a reality that most people don't want to acknowledge. That institutions sometimes do make decisions that prioritize their own survival over individual cases. But the internet doesn't care about nuance. The internet doesn't care about context. The internet saw a clip of a powerful doctor seeming to say that reputation was more important than human life, and the internet decided that the story was simple. A doctor who valued his hospital's reputation more than his patients' lives. Within 2 weeks, the story had been picked up by major news outlets. Within 3 weeks, there were calls for my father to be investigated. Within a month, the state medical board had opened a formal inquiry into his conduct and the conduct of Stewart Memorial Hospital. My father responded to the situation the way that he had learned to respond to threats over the course of his entire career. He did not take responsibility. He did not engage in self-reflection. He did not acknowledge that perhaps there were legitimate concerns about the way that institutional reputation had been prioritized over individual cases. Instead, he did what powerful people often do when they find themselves under attack. He found someone to blame. He decided to blame me. 3 weeks after my documentary began to circulate, my father called me. I remember the call because his voice was different than it had ever been before. It was cold. It was calculated. It was the voice of someone who had decided that his relationship with his son was less important than his own survival. "What you have done," he said, "is unconscionable. You have used confidential information that you obtained as a member of my family to damage not just my reputation, but the reputation of an entire institution that has spent decades serving the medical community and this city." "I used information that was in the public record," I said. "I used information that anyone could have found if they had looked. I used information that should have been disclosed to the families of the patients." "You used information that you obtained through a position of trust," my father said. "You betrayed that trust. You betrayed your family, and you did it to make a name for yourself as a filmmaker." "That's not why I made the film," I said. "I made it because I believed that the truth mattered." "The truth," my father said, is that you are a disappointment. The truth is that you have always been someone who could never quite accept his place in this family. The truth is that you have spent your entire life trying to prove something that shouldn't need to be proven. I remember feeling something break inside me when he said that. I remember realizing that my father had decided that I was the problem. He had decided that the issue wasn't that his hospital had prioritized reputation over patient safety. The issue was that I had been disloyal enough to expose it. 2 weeks before the gala, my father called me again. This time, he told me that he wanted to meet with me. He wanted to discuss the situation. He wanted to find a way to resolve things before they got any worse. I agreed to meet with him because I was still holding on to some hope that he might understand. I was still holding on to the belief that he might look at what I had documented and recognize that I had done the right thing. The meeting took place in a restaurant in Portland. It was a place that my father frequented, a place where he was known and respected. He arrived late, which I understood was an intentional message. He was demonstrating power through the subtle violence of making me wait. When he sat down, he didn't greet me warmly. He didn't ask how I had been. He launched directly into what he wanted to say. I have been made aware, he said, that you have been offered a significant sum of money to expand your documentary into a feature-length film. I have also been made aware that you are working with lawyers who specialize in medical liability cases. I want to know what your intention is. My intention, I said, is to continue telling the truth about what happened at your hospital. The truth, my father said, is a matter of perspective. From my perspective, the truth is that you are a disloyal son who has betrayed his family for professional advancement. From my perspective, I said, the truth is that 3 people died because the hospital prioritized its reputation over patient safety. That's not a matter of perspective, that's a fact. My father leaned back in his chair. He looked at me for a long moment without speaking. If you continue with this course of action, he finally said, you will no longer be welcome in this family. You will no longer be my son. You will be someone who I do not know and do not recognize. Is that a threat? I asked. It's a fact, my father said. Just like the facts in your documentary are facts. Just like my reputation, which took me 40 years to build and which you are destroying in the space of 3 months, is also a fact. Your reputation, I said, isn't being destroyed because I made a documentary. Your reputation is being questioned because of the decisions you made, because of the way you chose to handle medical complications by hiding the truth from the families involved. That's not my fault. That's yours. My father stood up. He didn't say anything else. He just stood up and he walked out of the restaurant. I didn't see him again until the gala. The gala was the 20th anniversary celebration of Stewart Memorial Hospital. It was the kind of event that my father had been organizing for years. A prestigious gathering of doctors, hospital administrators, philanthropists, and media figures. It was designed to celebrate the hospital's accomplishments and to reinforce its reputation as one of the leading medical institutions in the Pacific Northwest. My father had invited me to attend. I didn't want to go, but my mother, my stepmother Elizabeth, had called me and asked me to come. She said that it was important to the family. She said that my father wanted me there. She said that maybe this could be an opportunity to reconcile. I agreed to come because I still had some hope at that point. I still believed that there might be a way to repair the damage between us. I still believed that my father might eventually understand why I had made the film. The gala was held in a grand ballroom in downtown Portland. There were 400 guests. There were ice sculptures and champagne fountains and waiters carrying hors d'oeuvres on silver platters. The room was decorated with flowers and string lights. It looked like the kind of event that belonged in a fairy tale, beautiful and expensive and completely disconnected from anything real. My father was in his element. He was moving through the crowd, accepting congratulations and compliments, performing the role of the successful doctor and hospital administrator. He looked powerful and important and completely in control. I was standing near the bar, nursing a drink and trying to figure out how to get through the evening when my father tapped on a microphone. The crowd quieted. The string quartet that had been playing in the corner stopped. Everyone turned to look at him. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Tonight is a celebration of 20 years of excellence at Stewart Memorial Hospital. But as I was preparing for this evening, I was thinking about what excellence really means. I was thinking about the fact that excellence isn't just about the quality of our work. It's about the character of our institution. It's about the values that we hold sacred. And it's about the loyalty that we demand from those who are part of this institution." He paused. He looked directly at me. "Unfortunately," he continued, "there is someone here tonight who has violated that trust. There is someone here who has betrayed the values of this institution. There is someone here who has prioritized personal advancement over family loyalty." The room was completely silent now. People were looking around, trying to figure out who he was talking about. "I'm talking about my son," my father said. "I'm talking about Aaron Stewart, who has used confidential information and his position as a family member to create a documentary that is designed to damage this hospital and my reputation." I felt all 400 pairs of eyes turn toward me. "I was hoping," my father continued, "that he would reconsider his actions before tonight. I was hoping that he would understand the damage he was causing to his family and to this institution. But he has made it clear that he is not willing to do that. He has made it clear that he is willing to sacrifice his family for professional advancement." My father pulled out a tablet. He walked to the side of the stage where a screen was set up. He pressed a button, and a video began to play. It was footage of me, but it wasn't footage from my documentary. It was footage that I had never recorded. It was footage of me in what appeared to be a bar, saying terrible things. I appeared to be drunk. I appeared to be saying cruel things about my father and about the hospital. I appeared to be laughing about the damage I was causing. And then the footage cut to me in a medical uniform, tossing papers into a trash can, appearing to say that I didn't care about patient safety because I was only interested in making money from the documentary. The footage was a lie. The footage was a fabrication, but it was also completely effective. The crowd reacted with gasps and murmurs. I could see people on their phones recording the video, probably already sharing it on social media. I realized in that moment what my father had done. He had gone to a professional video editing company and created a false narrative. He had created video evidence that suggested that I was not motivated by ethics or truth, but by greed and malice. He had weaponized technology to destroy me publicly the way I had attempted to hold him accountable for his actions, and I did what I should have done. I stood up. I walked to the stage. I grabbed the microphone from my father's hand. "Everything you just saw," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me, "is a fabrication. That video is not real. That footage is not real. Those are not my words. That is not me." "I know," my father said quietly, "but does anyone else?" I looked out at the crowd. I looked at the 400 people who had just watched a video that suggested that I was a fraudulent filmmaker motivated by greed and malice. I looked at the journalists who were recording everything. I looked at my mother, who had her hand over her mouth. And I realized that my father had just done to me what he had done to the families of the patients who had died. He had told a lie, and he had made it so convincing that the truth would take years to untangle. I looked at my father. "You just proved," I said quietly, "everything that I said in my documentary. You just proved that reputation matters more to you than the truth. You just proved that you're willing to create a lie to protect your image." I walked off the stage. I walked out of the ballroom. I walked out of the hotel. As I was walking to my car, I saw Cynthia, my girlfriend of 5 years. She was standing outside the hotel with her coat over her arm. She looked like she was about to follow me out, but she didn't. She turned around and walked back into the hotel. It was the last time I would see her for nearly a decade. 8 years. That's how long I spent away from Portland. 8 years in Seattle, building a documentary production company called True Lens Studios, taking on projects that had nothing to do with my family or my past. 8 years of trying to convince myself that what had happened at the gala didn't matter anymore. 8 years of trying to accept that my father had successfully rewritten the narrative. 8 years of watching from a distance as my father rebuilt his reputation, as he was eventually cleared of all charges by the state medical board, as he became even more respected and celebrated than he had been before. The medical board's investigation into my father and Stuart Memorial Hospital had lasted for 3 years. During that time, they reviewed patient cases. They reviewed medical records. They interviewed hospital staff. And in the end, they determined that while there had been some lapses in how complications had been documented, there was no evidence of intentional wrongdoing or deliberate attempts to conceal information from families. My father had survived. And in surviving, he had emerged stronger than before. He had become the story of a physician who had been unfairly attacked by his own son, but who had persevered through that betrayal. He had become a symbol of institutional integrity and personal resilience. Everything that I had tried to accomplish with my documentary had been completely undone by that one night at the gala. I was living in Seattle when Brandon Gonzalez found me. Brandon had been my best friend in college. We had done documentaries together. We had collaborated on a project about agricultural workers in the Pacific Northwest. And then we had drifted apart the way that college friends often do, losing touch over the years, connecting only occasionally through social media. Brandon showed up at my office one morning in the spring. He was carrying a folder. He looked different than he had in college. Older, more serious, carrying the weight of something important. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "Okay," I said. "But I have to warn you that I don't do personal work anymore. If this is about my father, I'm not interested." "It's about Stuart Memorial Hospital, Brandon said. "But not about your father, at least not directly." He opened the folder and he pulled out a stack of documents. They were internal memos from the hospital. They were dated after the medical board's investigation had ended. They discussed 3 cases of patient deaths that hadn't been included in the investigation. They discussed ways to prevent future complications by implementing new safety protocols. And they discussed the fact that these cases had been deliberately excluded from the investigation because including them would have resulted in a much more serious outcome for my father. "Where did you get these?" I asked. "From a source inside the hospital," Brandon said. "Someone who worked in medical records during the period when your documentary was creating problems for your father. Someone who felt guilty about what they did to help cover things up." I looked at the documents. I read through them carefully. And I realized that my father had done exactly what I had accused him of doing. He had deliberately concealed information from the state medical board. He had prioritized institutional reputation over patient safety and honesty. "Why are you bringing this to me?" I asked Brandon. Because, he said, the system didn't work, the documentary didn't work, the media coverage didn't work, the investigation didn't work. But you know what might work? Evidence, hard evidence, ironclad, documented evidence that your father deliberately lied to the state medical board about patient cases. I'm not interested in revenge, I said. This isn't revenge, Brandon said. This is justice. Is there a difference? I asked. I think there is, Brandon said. Revenge is about making someone suffer. Justice is about telling the truth and accepting the consequences of that truth. I looked at Brandon for a long moment. I've spent 8 years trying to move past this, I said. I've spent 8 years trying to convince myself that it didn't matter. I've spent 8 years building a life that has nothing to do with my father. But it does matter, Brandon said. And you know it does. Because if it didn't matter, you wouldn't look like you haven't slept in 8 years. He was right. I hadn't slept properly in 8 years. I had spent 8 years replaying the gala in my head. I had spent 8 years wondering what I should have done differently. I had spent 8 years carrying the knowledge that I had tried to tell the truth and that the truth hadn't been enough. What do you want me to do? I asked. I want you to make another documentary, Brandon said. I want you to make a film that tells the complete story. I want you to make a film that includes all the evidence that wasn't included before. I want you to make a film that is so comprehensive and so irrefutable that no one will be able to ignore it. And you? I asked. What's your role in this? I'm going to help you, Brandon said. I'm going to help you gather evidence. I'm going to help you interview people. I'm going to help you put together a film that can't be dismissed or explained away. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell Brandon that I wasn't interested. I wanted to tell him that I had moved on and that I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life pursuing a vendetta against my father. But I didn't say any of those things because I realized that what Brandon was proposing wasn't revenge. It was completion. It was finishing what I had started 8 years ago. Okay, I said, let's do it. The next 18 months were intense. I reached out to my half-sister Anne and explained what I was doing. Anne had always been supportive of me, even when our father refused to acknowledge my documentary. Anne worked as a sociologist, and she had actually done research on institutional cultures of silence. She understood the problem better than most people. I want to help, Anne said immediately. I want to do a formal study of the culture of silence at Stewart Memorial Hospital. I want to interview staff members and document the way that institutional pressure to protect reputation influences medical decision-making. Anne began conducting interviews with hospital employees. She framed her work as academic research rather than as an investigation into my father's conduct. She interviewed nurses and surgical technicians and administrative staff. She asked them about the pressures they felt. She asked them about the way that institutional loyalty was enforced. She asked them about the cases where patient safety had been compromised in favor of protecting the hospital's reputation. What she discovered was a systematic culture of silence. She discovered that employees had been explicitly told that their job security depended on their willingness to keep information confidential. She discovered that employees who had raised concerns about patient safety had been marginalized and eventually fired. She discovered that the hospital had created a system where telling the truth was punished and loyalty was rewarded. Brandon worked on gathering financial documentation. He was able to obtain records that showed that my father had used hospital resources to hire the video editing company that had created the fabricated footage used at the gala. He was able to obtain records that showed that money had been paid to certain staff members in exchange for their silence about specific cases. he was able to show a clear pattern of financial incentive for institutional silence. I worked on the technical side of the documentary. I worked on finding the best way to present the information so that it would be compelling and impossible to dismiss. I worked on interviewing the families of the patients who had died. I worked on getting them to understand that their children's deaths hadn't been accidents. They had been the result of deliberate institutional choices to prioritize reputation over safety. One of those families was the family of a young woman named Sarah Mitchell. Sarah had died during a surgical complication at Stewart Memorial Hospital. The complication could have been prevented if the attending surgeon hadn't made a decision to move quickly through her case to stay on schedule. The complication could have been prevented if the hospital had prioritized safety over efficiency. I interviewed Sarah's mother. It was one of the most difficult interviews I have ever done because I had to tell her what I had already known, that her daughter's death had been preventable. I had to tell her that the hospital had deliberately concealed this information from her. I had to tell her that the man responsible for that cover-up was my father. "I'm sorry," I said to her after I finished explaining everything. "Don't apologize," she said. "You didn't do this. Your father did. You're just telling the truth about it." "But I tried to tell the truth 8 years ago," I said, "and no one listened. And he won anyway. He survived and he became more respected than ever." "Maybe he won the battle," Sarah's mother said, "but you can still win the war. You can still make sure that other families don't have to go through what mine went through." I made a decision at that moment. I decided that I wasn't going to make this documentary for revenge. I wasn't going to make it to hurt my father. I was going to make it for Sarah Mitchell and the other patients who had died because of institutional decisions to prioritize reputation over safety. Over the next 6 months, I compiled everything. I organized all the evidence. I interviewed all the people who were willing to talk to me. I reviewed all the medical records. I examined all the financial documentation. I created a comprehensive timeline of how the hospital had prioritized reputation over patient safety. And then I took all of that information to a lawyer named Michael Chen. Michael was an expert in medical liability and healthcare fraud. I showed him everything that I had gathered. I told him about my father and the cover-up. I told him about the video fabrication at the gala. "This is serious," Michael said after he had reviewed all the materials. "This is actionable. This is the kind of evidence that could result in criminal charges." "I don't want criminal charges," I said. "I just want the truth to come out." "The truth will come out," Michael said. "But understand what that means. It means your father will face consequences. It means his career will be over. It means everything he's built will be destroyed." "He tried to destroy me," I said. "He tried to destroy my credibility. He tried to make it seem like I was a liar motivated by greed and malice." "Yes," Michael said, "and now you have the chance to expose that lie. But before you do that, I want you to understand what that will cost." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean," Michael said, "that you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that your father will not recover from this. I mean that you need to prepare yourself for the fact that by exposing him, you may destroy him completely. He's 63 years old. His career defines him. If we go forward with this, his career will end. And I don't know if he has the psychological resources to handle that kind of destruction." I listened to what Michael was saying, and I thought about my father. I thought about the man who had disowned me at the gala. I thought about the man who had fabricated evidence against me. I thought about the man who had prioritized his reputation over his relationship with his son. I need to think about this, I said. That night, I sat alone in my apartment in Seattle, and I thought about what I was proposing to do. I thought about the fact that what I was about to do would end my father's career. I thought about the fact that his entire identity was built around being a successful doctor. I thought about what would happen to him if I took that away, and I realized that I was at a crossroads. I could move forward with the documentary and I could tell the truth about what happened, or I could let it go and I could allow my father to continue with his life and his reputation intact. But I also realized that there was a third option. I could speak to my father before I released the documentary. I could give him the chance to understand what I had found. I could give him the chance to come clean before the truth came out in a public way. I called my mother. For the first time in 8 years, I spoke to Elizabeth. "Hello, Erin," she said. And I could hear the hope in her voice. I could hear that she had been waiting 8 years for me to call. "I have something I need to discuss with you," I said. "And I need you to arrange a meeting with my father." I agreed to meet with my father at his home, the home that I had grown up in, the home that had been the setting for so many of my childhood memories, the home that I had avoided for 8 years. My father was sitting in his study when I arrived. He was older than I remembered. His hair was almost completely white. His face had lines that suggested the weight of 8 years of carrying the secret that he and I both knew, that he had lied to the state medical board, that he had covered up patient deaths, that he had destroyed me publicly to protect his reputation. "Erin," he said when I walked into the room, "I didn't think I would ever see you again." "Neither did I," said. "But I have something I need to show you." I opened my laptop and I pulled up the documentary. It was nearly complete. All that remained was the final editing. I pressed play and I watched as 8 years of work and pain and investigation unfolded on the screen. My father watched in silence. I watched his face as the evidence became clear. I watched as he understood that I had compiled irrefutable proof that he had lied to the state medical board. I watched as he understood that his secret was no longer secret. When the documentary ended, my father sat in silence for a long time. "How long have you known?" he finally asked. "About 2 years, Henri," I said. "I've spent the last 2 years gathering evidence. I've spent the last 2 years documenting everything. I've spent the last 2 years preparing to release this." "And what do you want?" my father asked. "Do you want me to confess? Do you want me to apologize publicly? Do you want me to throw myself on the mercy of the court?" "I don't know what I want," I said. "I've been asking myself that question for 8 years. I spent the first part of that time angry at you. I spent the rest of it trying to understand how you could do what you did, and I still don't have an answer." "I did it," my father said, "because I was afraid. I was afraid of losing everything. I was afraid of becoming irrelevant. I was afraid of becoming the kind of person that nobody respects. And so I did what I thought I needed to do to protect myself." "You lied," I said. "You lied to the state medical board. You lied to the families of the patients. You lied to yourself." "Yes," my father said, "I lied. And I've spent 8 years living with the consequences of that lie." "Have you?" I asked. "Because from what I can see, you've spent the last 8 years becoming more successful. You've spent the last 8 years becoming more respected. The lie didn't have any consequences for you. It had consequences for me." "I know," my father said. "I know that what I did to you at the gala was unconscionable. I know that I fabricated evidence against you. I know that I destroyed your credibility publicly to protect myself. And I've regretted it every single day since." "Then why didn't you reach out, Dust?" I asked. "Why did not you try to repair the damage you caused?" "Because," my father said, I was too much of a coward, because I didn't know what to say, because I was afraid that anything I said would make it worse. I looked at my father. I looked at this man who had spent my entire life teaching me about the importance of reputation and success and achievement. I looked at the man who had disowned me at a public gala. I looked at the man who had fabricated evidence against me to protect himself. And I realized that I didn't hate him. I was disappointed by him. I was angry at him, but I didn't hate him. I'm going to release this documentary, Geese, I said. I wanted to tell you that before it happened. I wanted to give you the chance to understand what's coming. What will happen? My father asked. Will I be prosecuted? Probably, I said. There's evidence of obstruction of justice. There's evidence that you deliberately withheld information from the state medical board. There's evidence that you paid people to remain silent. Yes, you will probably be prosecuted. And my medical license? My father asked. That will be revoked, I said. Your career is over. My father stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the garden that he and my mother had spent years cultivating. He looked out at the life he had built. I deserve it, he said. I deserve all of it. Yes, I said, you do. But even as I said it, I didn't feel the satisfaction that I thought I would feel. I didn't feel the triumph of finally getting my revenge. I felt empty. I felt sad. There's something else, I said. I want you to come to the premiere of the documentary. I want you to watch it with the rest of the world. I want you to be there when the truth comes out. My father turned to look at me. Why would you want that? He asked. Because, I said, I want people to see you watching your own destruction. I want people to understand that this isn't just about the institution. It's about you. It's about the choices you made. Okay, my father said. I'll be there. The premiere of the documentary was held at a theater in Portland. It was called Not the Healer's Lie. I had chosen that title deliberately because I wanted to capture the paradox at the heart of my father's behavior. He was a healer. He had dedicated his life to the practice of medicine, and yet he had lied. He had chosen reputation over patience. He had chosen survival over integrity. The theater was packed. There were journalists and medical professionals and hospital administrators and members of the community. There were families of the patients who had died. And there was my father, sitting in the back of the theater, preparing to watch his career end. When the documentary began, I saw my father take a deep breath. I saw him prepare himself for what was about to happen. The documentary opened with the clip of my father from the original interview. Sometimes patients die. That's the reality of medicine. The clip was taken in context this time. The full context of what he had meant was explained. It was clear that he was trying to describe difficult ethical realities, not saying their reputation was more important than patients' lives. But then the documentary moved forward. It showed the 3 cases. It showed the documentation. It showed the financial records. It showed the interviews with hospital employees who had been pressured to remain silent. It showed the evidence that my father had deliberately withheld information from the state medical board. And then it showed footage of my father meeting with the state medical board. It showed him testifying that all relevant cases had been reviewed. It showed him lying. It showed him doing the thing that he had accused me of doing at the gala. It showed him telling a lie and expecting people to believe it. I watched my father watch himself lie, and I saw something break in his face. When the documentary ended, there was silence in the theater. And then slowly there was applause. People were standing. People were applauding the work that I had done. People were standing in recognition of the truth that I had told. My father didn't stand. My father sat in his seat with his hands in his lap, looking like a man who had just watched his entire life collapse. The journalists rushed to me with questions. The families of the patients who had died came to me with gratitude and tears. The medical professionals in the audience engaged me in discussions about healthcare ethics and institutional accountability, but I didn't engage with any of them. I watched my father get up and walk toward the exit. I followed him outside. My father was standing on the sidewalk, looking like he didn't know where he was or how to get anywhere. "Are you okay?" I asked. "No," he said. "I'm not okay. Everything I've built is destroyed. Everything I've worked for is gone." "Yes," I said. "I know." "I suppose this is satisfaction for you," my father said. "I suppose this is the moment you've been waiting for 8 years." "No," I said. "This isn't satisfaction. I don't feel satisfied. I feel sad." My father looked at me. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you feel sad? I destroyed you. I fabricated evidence against you. I humiliated you publicly." "Because," I said, "you're my father, and I've just destroyed you the same way you tried to destroy me. And destroying you didn't make me feel better. It just made me feel empty." My father stood there for a moment, and then he did something that I had never seen him do before. He cried. He cried standing on the sidewalk outside the theater where his documentary had just premiered and destroyed his career. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry, Aaron. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for the lie at the gala. I'm sorry for everything." "I know," I said. "But sorry doesn't undo what happened. Sorry doesn't restore the patients who died. Sorry doesn't give us back the relationship that we destroyed." "No," my father said. "It doesn't, but it's all I have." The days and weeks following the premiere of the documentary were intense. The film went viral. It was shared across social media platforms. It was covered by every major news outlet. It became the subject of conversations in hospitals and medical schools across the country. And it triggered a new investigation. This time, the investigation was much more serious. This time, there was irrefutable evidence of obstruction of justice. This time, there was no way for my father to escape the consequences of his actions. My father was charged with obstruction of justice and fraud. The charges carried a potential prison sentence of up to 5 years. He hired a lawyer. He prepared for trial. But before the trial could take place, there was a hearing before the medical board. The medical board had to determine whether my father's medical license should be revoked based on the evidence of his dishonesty and his violations of medical ethics. I was called to testify at the hearing. So was Anne with her research on institutional culture and silence. So were the families of the patients who had died. So were the hospital employees who had been pressured to remain silent. My father was represented by a lawyer who had made his career on defending physicians accused of misconduct. His lawyer's strategy was clear. He was going to argue that my father's actions, while perhaps not ideally handled, were the result of reasonable professional judgment in a complex situation. He was going to argue that medical complications are a normal part of medical practice. He was going to argue that there was no evidence that my father had deliberately withheld information from the state medical board with intent to defraud. The hearing took place over the course of a week. Experts testified about medical standards of care. Experts testified about the documentation and communication of medical complications. Experts testified about the obligations of hospital administrators to disclose information to regulatory bodies. And then there were the testimonies that broke people. The mother of Sarah Mitchell testified about what it was like to learn that her daughter's death could have been prevented. She testified about the conversations she had with my father after Sarah's death, when she asked him about complications and he told her that everything had been handled appropriately. She testified about the moment when she watched my documentary and realized that he'd been lying to her the entire time. "He looked me in the eye," Sarah's mother said, "and he told me that my daughter died because of medical complications that no one could have predicted or prevented. He told me that sometimes things just happen in medicine and that I needed to accept that and move on. And then I watched a documentary that showed that he had deliberately concealed information that could have saved my daughter's life. He didn't just lie to me. He made me complicit in his lie. He made me defend him to other people because I believed that what he had told me was true." The board members looked at her, and I could see the impact that her testimony had on them. Anne testified about her research on institutional cultures of silence. She presented data showing that at Stewart Memorial Hospital, there was a clear pattern of employees being punished for raising safety concerns and being rewarded for remaining silent. She presented evidence that the hospital had created a system where the cost of telling the truth was higher than the cost of lying. Dr. Robinson, Anne said, didn't just make an individual decision to conceal information. He created an institutional environment where information concealment became normalized. He created a system where people's livelihoods depended on their willingness to remain silent about patient safety concerns. When my father's lawyer cross-examined Anne, he tried to suggest that her research was biased because she was motivated by loyalty to me. Anne responded by presenting her academic credentials and her prior research on other institutions that had similar problems. "My research on Stewart Memorial Hospital is consistent with research I've done on other institutions," Anne said. "The specific names and individuals change, but the pattern is always the same. When institutional reputation becomes the priority, patient safety becomes secondary." That's not my opinion. That's what the data shows. The hearing concluded with closing statements from both sides. My father's lawyer argued that the charges were overblown, that my father had made decisions in good faith, that the evidence against him was circumstantial and subject to interpretation. Then it was my turn to testify. I didn't want to testify. I didn't want to stand up in front of the medical board and detail my father's dishonesty, but I knew that I had to. I knew that my testimony was the only way to tell the complete story. "My father," I said, looking directly at the medical board members, "told me something when I was 12 years old. He told me that reputation is everything. He taught me that a good reputation is more valuable than money, more valuable than health, more valuable than integrity. And for a long time, I believed that. I thought that was how the world worked. I thought that reputation was the ultimate good." I paused. "But I was wrong," I continued. "Reputation is not the ultimate good. Truth is the ultimate good." And my father violated that principle when he prioritized his reputation over the truth about what had happened to those patients. "When I made my first documentary 8 years ago," I said, "I was trying to tell the truth. But my father responded by fabricating evidence against me. He responded by suggesting that I was motivated by greed and malice. He responded by destroying my credibility so that people wouldn't believe me." "And it worked," I said. "For 8 years, people didn't believe me. My father's reputation was restored. He became even more respected and celebrated. And meanwhile, I spent 8 years knowing that I had told the truth and that people didn't believe me." "The question before this board," I said, "is whether we are going to allow reputation to be more important than truth." The question is whether we are going to allow doctors and hospital administrators to lie to regulatory bodies in order to protect institutional reputation. The question is whether we are going to allow the system to work the way that my father made it work, where the person who tells the truth is destroyed and the person who lies is protected. I don't know if prosecuting my father will answer that question, I said. I don't know if revoking his medical license will answer it. But I do know that if we do nothing, if we allow him to continue practicing medicine and continue building his reputation, then we are answering the question by saying that reputation is more important than truth. And I don't think that's an answer that any of us should be comfortable with. The board deliberated for 2 days, and then they issued their decision. They revoked my father's medical license. They suspended him from practicing medicine permanently. They referred the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution, and they required Stewart Memorial Hospital to implement new oversight procedures and ethics training to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. My father stood in the courtroom when the decision was announced. He showed no emotion. He just stood there, looking like a man who had finally understood the full weight of his actions. After the hearing, I was surrounded by reporters. They wanted to know how I felt. They wanted to know if I felt vindicated. They wanted to know if I thought my father was getting what he deserved. I didn't answer their questions. I just walked away. That night, I called my mother. I asked her if my father was okay. "No," she said. "He's not okay. He hasn't eaten or slept since the hearing. He's just sitting in his study, staring at nothing." "I destroyed him," I said. "Yes," my mother said. "You did. But he destroyed himself, Aaron. You just exposed what he had already done." "Does that make it better?" I asked. "I don't know," my mother said. "I don't know if there's a version of this situation where anyone gets better. I think your father is going to have to learn to live in a world where he is not important, and I think that is going to be much more difficult for him than prison." The criminal trial lasted for 6 months. My father eventually took a plea deal. He agreed to plead guilty to 2 counts of obstruction of justice and 1 count of fraud. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. He was required to pay restitution to the families of the patients who had died. His medical license was permanently revoked. The documentary, which had been released only in limited theatrical venues before the hearing, was now released nationally. It won awards at film festivals. It was nominated for major documentary prizes. It was selected for inclusion in medical school curricula as a teaching tool about medical ethics and institutional accountability. I became famous. I became the person who had destroyed his own father to tell the truth. People approached me with congratulations. People told me that I had done the right thing. People told me that I had achieved justice. But I didn't feel like I had achieved justice. I felt like I had burned down a house that I used to live in. 1 year after my father was sentenced, I was sitting in my office in Seattle when my mother called. She told me that my father had been diagnosed with cancer. She told me that the doctors estimated that he had 6 months to live, maybe less. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know how to process the information that the man I had spent 10 years fighting against was now dying. "He wants to see you," my mother said. "I don't know if I can do that," I said. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," my mother said. "I'm just asking you to see him." I flew to Portland. I went to the hospital where my father was receiving treatment. The hospital was not Stewart Memorial. It was a different hospital, as if my father couldn't bear to be in the institution he had built and destroyed. My father was thin. He looked like a man who was already halfway to death. He was lying in a hospital bed, looking out the window at a gray sky. When he saw me, he didn't speak. He just looked at me for a long moment. "Hello, Father," I said. "Hello, Aaron," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I sat in a chair next to his bed. "I've been thinking a lot," my father said. "I've been thinking about the choices I made. I've been thinking about the person I was and the person I became." "And?" I asked. "And I've realized that I was the villain in the story that you told," he said. "I've realized that everything you documented was true. I've realized that I prioritized my reputation over patients' lives. I've realized that I tried to destroy you to protect myself." "Yes," I said, "you did all of those things." "I want to apologize," my father said. "I want to tell you that I'm sorry for what I did to you. I want to tell you that you were right to expose me. I want to tell you that I deserved what happened to me." I listened to my father speak, and I realized that this was the apology I had been waiting for 10 years to receive. This was the moment when he was acknowledging his wrongdoing. This was the moment when he was admitting that I had been right all along. But it didn't make me feel the way I thought it would make me feel. It just made me sad. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. My father closed his eyes and a tear rolled down his face. "That's very generous," he said. "You don't have to forgive me." "I know," I said. "But I do forgive you. Not because what you did was okay, but because I'm tired of carrying the anger." My father died 3 months later. He died in the hospital, alone, the night before I had planned to visit him. My mother called me and told me I didn't cry when she told me. I just felt empty. After my father's funeral, I returned to Seattle. I returned to my work. I continued making documentaries about institutional accountability and the ethics of truth-telling. But something had changed. I had spent 10 years pursuing justice, and I had achieved it. My father had been destroyed. His career had ended. His reputation had been destroyed. He had spent his final years as a prisoner and as a pariah. And it hadn't made me feel better. It hadn't brought back the patients who had died. It hadn't restored my relationship with my father. It had just added another scar to the collection of scars that this situation had created. I began to question whether what I had done was actually justice, or whether it was just revenge wrapped in the language of justice. 1 year after my father died, I received a letter from Elizabeth. She wrote, "Aaron, I wanted you to know something. In his final weeks, your father asked me to tell you something if he died without the chance to say it to you directly. He asked me to tell you that he was proud of you. He said that you had the courage to tell the truth when it would have been easier to lie. He said that you had sacrificed your relationship with him because you believed that the truth was more important than family loyalty. And he said that although it took him losing everything to understand it, he respected you for that choice. I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know that in the end, your father understood what you had done and why you had done it. I wanted you to know that he carried that understanding with him until the end." I cried when I read that letter. I cried because my father had finally understood. I cried because it had taken him losing everything to get there. I cried because the price of justice had been so high. Looking back now, I can see that what I did was necessary. The patients who died deserved to have their deaths investigated. The families who had been lied to deserved to know the truth. The institution deserved to be held accountable for its choices. But I also understand that justice is not always clean or satisfying. Justice is not always a moment of triumph where the good person defeats the bad person and everyone lives happily ever after. Justice is often messy and complicated and painful, and it often requires destroying things in order to create the possibility of rebuilding. I used to believe, like my father did, that reputation was everything. But I was wrong. Truth is everything. Integrity is everything. The willingness to tell the truth, even when it costs you everything, is everything. But I also understand now that the cost of telling the truth is sometimes higher than we think it will be. I understand that pursuing justice can destroy relationships that we value. I understand that exposing lies can expose us to consequences that we didn't anticipate. And I understand that just because something is necessary doesn't mean it's easy or that it should be undertaken lightly. I understand that before you go down the path of exposing someone you love, you should think very carefully about the cost. But I also understand that sometimes the cost is worth paying. Sometimes the truth is more important than anything else. And sometimes being willing to sacrifice everything to tell the truth is what it means to be a human being with integrity. I continue to make documentaries. I continue to tell stories about institutional accountability and the importance of truth-telling. And I continue to carry the knowledge that by telling the truth, I destroyed my relationship with my father and I ultimately contributed to his death. I don't regret what I did, but I also don't celebrate it. I recognize it for what it was. A necessary choice that came with a high price. The most important thing that I learned from this experience is that truth is not simple. Truth is not a thing that you can tell once and then move on from. Truth is an ongoing commitment to seeing clearly and speaking honestly, even when it's difficult, even when it's painful, even when the consequences are higher than you want to pay. My father used to say that reputation is everything. I spent 10 years proving that he was wrong. But in doing so, I learned that he was partially right about something else. He was right that our choices define us. He was right that the decisions we make about what to prioritize and what to sacrifice ultimately determine who we become. By choosing to tell the truth, I became a person who values integrity over reputation, over family loyalty, over my own comfort and ease. I became a person who was willing to destroy relationships to defend truth. And I became a person who has to live with the consequences of that choice. I became a person who destroyed his own father. I became a person who pursued justice and who will spend the rest of his life wondering if that pursuit was truly just or if it was simply revenge dressed up in more righteous clothing. But I would make the same choice again, because the alternative of lying, of remaining silent, of prioritizing my relationship with my father over the truth about what he had done, would have been a betrayal of everything that I believe in, and that is a price that I am not willing to pay.